All right. How's everyone doing this afternoon? All right. My name's Alex Cooley. I'm a consultant here at ATC, and you've made it to our final panel of the day, the Cybersecurity Showdown. So before we dive in to our panel today, I wanted to give a little bit of insight into what we're seeing within the cybersecurity landscape here at ATC. So one piece of research that we go back to year in and year out would be the Emerging Technologies Roadmap. Now, this roadmap is key for all of you out in the audience because it's not only highlighting emerging technologies within security, but it gives you insight into network, IT automation, digital workspace. If it's an emerging technology, it's going to be on this list. And it gives you a good idea of what technologies are being deployed within the current year or even piloted going into the future. If we look into security just a little bit further, one piece of technology that we've seen progress into this year would be network detection and response. You can see that this is a piece of technology that is going to be deployed within 2024, and it's low risk to your organization. So by implementing this technology, it's going to greater that cybersecurity posture that you're looking to do, and also give visibility into the network. But a lot of times with these emerging technologies, some questions that come to mind may be, what partners do I partner with on these initiatives? Or where do I go to find these solutions? Well, look no further. This list is pretty daunting, right? This space is flooded with a lot of providers, and what we do very well here at ATC is help our clients navigate that landscape and land on best-of-breed providers that are going to knock out those emerging technologies and those projects for you in an excellent way. So I'm happy today to have 4 of those best-of-breed providers that have been absolutely crushing it in the space. Go ahead and introduce these folks. We have Bill from CATO Networks. We have Dan from Vigilant. We have Chris from Red Canary and Dmitriy from Artic Wolf. Bill, we'll start with you. Let's go ahead and dive into a little bit about who you are, what your role is, and where you guys fit within the cybersecurity landscape.
Yeah, sounds great. So my name is Bill Carter. I am Field Chief Technology Officer at CATO Networks. I also serve as Adjunct Professor of Cybersecurity for a university, and I am a member of the Ohio Cyber Reserves. So really happy to be here. CATO Networks was the pioneer in the SASE space. So we were SASE before there was such thing as SASE. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the things that you just heard spoken in terms of that common context, we were really formed on that. So absolutely a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great.
Yeah, my name's Dan Beavin. I am the COO for Vigilant. I have been in security and technology for a lot longer than I look. I look very young, I know. I shaved my beard off this week, so now I look even younger. But I spent 10 years of that as a hacker, offensive security practitioner for manufacturing, healthcare, finance. So a lot of the big industries I've spent on the other side of, which has been really helpful at Vigilant as being primarily on the defensive side. So we focus on the NDR, EDR, and then cloud workload protections. And we do all that through our CyberDNA platform, which is a patented platform that we've developed. And really what we do is we take our trusted source and take all those low source or low trust sources like Chris was talking about earlier, SIM and things like that, and make those a higher trusted source and just overall make your forensic decisions around security much better.
Chris?
Hey, Chris Rothe. I'm one of the founders and CTO of Red Canary. Red Canary was one of, if not the first, managed detection and response provider. We've sort of drifted now into a broader umbrella of security operations. Our primary focus has been endpoint, and now moving into cloud and identity is sort of the main attack vectors we see. Yeah, our role is to help security teams that are often understaffed and don't have enough folks to detect threats and keep up with sort of modern evasion techniques. That's our role. Find them and stop them.
Awesome. Dmitriy?
Dmitriy Sandler. I'm the Sales Engineering Director for Artic Wolf. Very similar story, right? So we've been around for 12 years, so we were doing SOC as a service, MDR, NDR, like before all the buzzwords came out, we were providing that service as well. So we're ultimately, our goal is to be a security operations platform and provider for customers, not only focusing on the technology and the data and kind of making sense of it all and doing threat analysis, threat detection, but also providing a unique concierge experience where every customer actually gets essentially named expertise or named experts that provide their security expertise and essentially look for ways to continuously improve your security posture outside of the detection response, all that fun stuff. or maybe not so fun stuff sometimes. But really looking at proactively improving our customers' security posture so that we're proactively reducing the risk, and then obviously being there should something happen as well.
Awesome. So Dmitriy, I know we talked about this before the panel, and this is something that is really privy to you, but what type of cybersecurity projects are you seeing a lot in the space today? What should clients out there really prioritize within their environments when they're thinking about implementing certain technologies?
Yeah, I think to some degree it'll depend on the organization and what they already have in place and what they don't. We can probably all talk about, for a very long time, about all the different projects there are. I think one of the things that quite honestly gets overlooked is vulnerability management, and not just scanning for vulnerabilities, but doing continuous scanning and prioritization. So one of the things that we see from our incident response team is like 60% of the vulnerabilities that led to massive attacks in, last year were 2 years old and more. Right? Having a strong vulnerability management program, and then again, ideally somebody to help you make sense of it and prioritize and understand like what you should look at first and foremost. For a lot of the organization we talk to is a gap. Again, ones that have something like that in place, then there might be other areas. Again, we heard about cloud security, and I'd say overall making sure that you have broad visibility across your entire environment, whether it's network, whether it's cloud, identity, really trying to make sure that you focus across the board. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I might throw a thought in there. One of the things, Chris said this earlier, that traditional SIEM is dead. That's something we're seeing a lot within our customer base, is not so much like, how do I get rid of my SIEM, but I'm paying this much for Splunk and I'm getting this much value out of it. I have all this data. Is there another solution where I don't necessarily want to throw it away, but I want to put it somewhere where I can store it for less? And in the rare event that I do need to go back and look at it, I still have hooks for it. So that's a big trend we've seen in terms of these modernization of the SIEM infrastructure.
Yeah, I'd kind of add on to that too. So, you said something great about vulnerability management. We as an organization are still seeing that probably the number one vulnerability that we're seeing attempted to be exploited is still Log4j. That's 2021, right? The last time that was done. So effective vulnerability management mitigation is absolutely important. But to go along the lines of what you were sharing just now, the whole idea of SIEM being dead, we see that as well, because SIEM does tend to be a very reactive type technology, and I think that's why we get into these discussions about artificial intelligence being much more proactive in being able to tell a security story. And I think that's going to continue to be absolutely critical. And those are the kinds of projects that we see some of our customers engaging in. How do we get much more ahead of this rather than being reactive?
Yeah, I like that you said that there, and that makes me think of a question about being on the offensive side. A lot of times in cybersecurity, it's reacting to threats or reacting to events. So how are you seeing your clients really playing on that offensive side and getting ahead of what's happening in the environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I think a lot of times our clients are still in a very old mindset that says, it's time to do our red team, blue team exercises. And that might be a yearly event or whatever schedule that they tend to have it on. And what I love seeing is that more and more we're getting into this purple teaming mentality. We're getting into this mentality where the attackers and the defenders are working together on a constant basis. I actually heard somebody refer to this most recently as a continuous penetration test, so to speak, right? So very, very powerful to have cooperation rather than those kind of celebratory events that we're doing on a somewhat regular basis and hoping that that's going to be sufficient. Certainly the threat actors aren't waiting until Christmas before they're going to make the attack. They're always out there. They're always looking.
Dan, any thoughts there?
Yeah, having spent a tremendous amount of time in offensive security, I do agree the whole mindset of let's do our annual red team engagements not a thing anymore. And if that's how you're doing it, still highly recommend moving to more of that real continuous style where as new things come out, CI/CD pipeline, injecting that stuff into that process. So that way, when you bring on a new tool, you build a new technology, you're security testing it as it goes. So you don't come along at the end of it and find somebody in your environment stealing all your information afterwards, and you're a little bit more proactive in that offensive space there.
It's interesting. CI/CD, it's almost it's a four-letter word to some organizations, right? Certainly to developers who see that almost as an interference of the security team in their development efforts. And certainly we know that that's how vulnerabilities can be introduced pretty quickly. And again, threat actors are smart enough. They're using techniques such as AI where they can begin to gather this information and know that this is the way we would need to target. So our keynote speaker was dead on. Watch out for your logos. Watch out for what you're advertising. And please, don't check your API keys into Git, right? It's not a good thing.
Yeah, let's continue that AI conversation a little bit. And I know, Chris, you kind of have a big data background, so what are your thoughts around how to effectively use AI within cybersecurity and maybe even how it can protect your data?
Yeah, AI has this interesting history in information security. So in the mid-teens, if you all remember, we had this big AI boom that was all centered around really machine learning, right? And at the end of the day, machine learning obviously is a derivative or a segment of artificial intelligence, but it's really classifiers, right? It's trained data and models trained on training data that says this is bad, this is good, and that's really useful. Like it's a way to do things. What we found with machine learning is that over time, adversaries very quickly move their way around it, right? And our core observation there was that anything that has a adversarial person, Chris referred to it as sort of the uniqueness that comes from human creativity. Anyone who, probably like Dan, anybody who can think their way around something can easily bypass that and walk right around it. So my experience with it was that AI and cybersecurity got this kind of negative connotation as you get later into the teens, where it was like, oh yeah, we've been promised so much by the AI-based security systems. And I think that's kind of sad because what they do is really useful, and it does provide significant value in terms of preventing repeat threats and stuff like that. The new frontier that we're on and it is a little bit different, where we're talking generative AI. And what is generative AI? How does it differ from the legacy, if you want to call it that, a few years old classifier systems? It gives you something that feels more like augmentation to your SOC. If we try to use it for detection, I think we still end up in the same place, which is that adversaries are going to walk around it or use their own versions of it to get past it. But if we instead think about it in terms of how do we take what the models can do, the large language models, maybe not even ones that we train for ourselves, but just generally are available, how do we use those and apply them to make the people in our security operations teams more effective? I think that's the right thread to be pulling. And I'll give you one example. So I saw a demo yesterday from a member of our AI team. With some of the tools that come out from some of the hyperscalers, like with effectively no implementation on your behalf or from your part, you can give it some API keys and give it a spec for an API, and then just start asking questions, and it will figure out which APIs routes to call and just give it back. So you say, here's the keys to my, call it your EDR system, and here's the API spec, here's the reference for it, and then you start asking it questions like, give me a summary of what endpoint 1234 did over the last 24 hours, and it'll go out, figure out on its own what APIs to call, pull the information back, summarize it into something useful. That's a huge opportunity to make our analysts more effective and get more time back in their day. So those are some of the things that we're seeing and some of the limitations that to expect. It's not going to solve everything. It's not going to be your analysts, but it can really supercharge folks in the SOC.
Yeah, I love that you said that. So we get asked that question a lot, is artificial intelligence going to replace our jobs, right? Is it going to replace the analyst? And I think the answer is no. What the real question should be is, does somebody who knows how to utilize artificial intelligence, are they going to replace your job if you don't? And I think that's a very real possibility. We understand that artificial intelligence can do these kind of fun things like hallucinating and so forth. And so we do try to train those models, but this is a constant thing. And one might even argue, and I certainly don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but we may still be seeing a zero-sum game. This is a perennial thing that we see all the time. So certainly very important, and there's a lot of attention on artificial intelligence right now. Embrace it, do know how to utilize it, but understand that the threat actors are doing the same exact thing, and so we continue the race.
Right. Push back on you real quick. Maybe not push back, but I got a question. So this, I hear this a lot, this idea of it's not going to take our job, but it can make us better in our job. I think that's a coping mechanism.
Sure.
Is it bad to have a world where there's no security analysts?
I didn't understand. So you're asking if it's bad to have a world with no security analysts?
Would that be bad? Like, what if AI could take the job as security analyst?
What if my aunt had wheels? Would she be a wagon?
I don't know.
I mean, I think the point is we know that there has to be security analysts, and I think our keynote speaker said it very well. There's value in the human being as a part of this chain. It's also one of the weakest parts of the chain, right? And threat actors also understand that. So I do think it's a tool set. It's something that we have to have. The analysts have to be here. So no, I don't think we're going to have a world where there's no analysts. They're going to have to be here because human creativity is absolutely amazing. We talk about rebooting firewalls on an irregular basis. That's the human part that I think is so important for this. So
I'll jump in real quick. I think it depends how you define security analysts as well, right? Like back in the day was, are you an analyst or, are you an engineer or an architect? And to some degree that title matters. So I think I'd probably say somewhere in the middle, there's going to still be a human factor, but what they do I think is going to be very different. I think to your point, I think a lot of the things that security analysts do today are likely for the most part going to, over time, not maybe in the next 12 months, hopefully, like they are going to go away or get heavily augmented. There will still be some tasks for humans, but they're going to be very different than what they do today. To some degree, even you can have automation to reboot firewalls at random intervals, and like there are certain things that we're going to be able to automate more and more. So we're going to need to figure out how to augment the human factor. We may need less humans in those roles, right? Or do we augment the roles that they do? Are they doing new things that have now come out? So I'd say yes and no to both to some degree. Absolutely. I think we just have to define what those capabilities are.
To get to that, if you've ever used a real language learning model, not just ChatGPT, but used like some of them, you have to ask it questions in a very specific way. You can't just throw whatever you want in there and get something back, because usually what you get back is garbage until you've had 5 or 6 interactions back and forth and get it right. So analysts are going to have to learn how to do that. I agree with you, Dmitriy. Those more rudimentary things that they're doing now are going to go away and going to get replaced by, having to have that higher level thinking, that higher level ability to use AI more than just, hey, can you create me a grocery list for all these things that I want to buy for this recipe? It's going to have to be much more advanced than that.
yeah, honestly, I think we're in violent agreement actually up here. I think you're absolutely right, Chris. I mean, No, you're right. It is very much a coping mechanism. It's almost something that we say to try to comfort ourselves a little bit about it, right? And the bottom line is there does need to be that embracing. You do need to take that on, and it is going to change the world fairly significantly. It's going to change the world. So I do think. Plus, you have one of the best haircuts on stage, so I have to agree with you.
I just want to meet your aunt.
Yeah, he wants to meet my aunt. Okay.
Well, let's dive into that human aspect a little bit more. So Dan, we talked about this a little bit. So where do you see the social dynamic come in play to cybersecurity? And for the folks out in the audience, really breeding a security first environment within organizations, because we all know humans are going to make the most mistakes.
Yeah, so it's the broken record that we all hear, right? Don't click on links. Users are always going to be the biggest vulnerability. But the thing I always see, and on the offensive side, one thing that we really used a lot was LinkedIn. And Chris talked about this earlier. People put what technology they use, what things they deployed, especially when folks are looking for jobs, their resume. And LinkedIn's always very helpful when you're doing offensive security. So if you're doing it in a large organization, there's a lot of good stuff out there. So really helping folks understand that you can't just share everything. And I don't want to talk about AI the whole time, but people will put stuff into AI models that is confidential intellectual property and not realize that they're doing it. And then those models start to get trained on that information. And then you as an attacker can use that information and start to use it against people. So the behavior of users really has to change with how they interact with data and how they use data. And that's really when you're moving into that leadership aspect. You have to lead with culture and mindset at those organizations to think that way. I've been in a lot of organizations where they're like, I have to type this MFA code in, or I got to reset my password again, or this thing makes my day take longer. So you have to lead by example too as a leader to make sure that you're building a culture where security is not a roadblock. It's not something that's getting in your way. If someone comes to you with this really cool AI tool, you don't just immediately shoot it down. You figure out, how do we vet it out? How do we test it? How do we make sure it does what they think it's going to do? Because if you always shoot it down, they're just going to go around you and use it anyway. We all know shadow IT is a real problem. So you have to embrace some of these things. and really communication and transparency. This is one that we've heard a lot. Hey, this person accidentally clicked a link, or they sent money to the wrong place and they got fired for it, right? Nobody's ever going to tell you that they clicked a link again if they know this person over in finance got fired because they did it. So you have to be transparent and give people a space to go where they can say, hey, I made a mistake. Here's what I did. Because if it happens to one person, there's 5 or 6 other people that were probably targeted in that organization. And if the first person comes out, those other 5 or 6 may be spared from that. Whereas if no one says anything, you might have multiple implants in that environment before you realize it.
Yeah, Dan, I love how you said that, and not just because you're trying to hack my phone right now. I think that there's an old quote that says that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And the bottom line is you can have the most robust security strategy that you can possibly think of. There are databases that you can go out there, or knowledge bases where you can learn about some of the psychology that threat actors use. I think of things like the MITRE ATT&CK framework and so forth. You can do that all day. But you do have to build that culture, that security culture right from the start. I would argue, and I'll admit that I kind of stole this phrase from somebody, but I really do think that the year 2024 is going to be the year of deception. Generative AI has gotten so good. We used to put the onus on our end users to say, you know what, when you get an email, you need to take a look at it, you need to hover over the link, you need to check the grammar, you need to do all those things. And the bottom line is generative AI and things like deep fakes and audio fakes, they're getting really good. And I think we need to keep in mind 2024 is a very interesting year. Certainly in this country, there's a major election coming, same thing in the European Union. We've got the Olympic Games that are coming. This is just, the year is ripe for deception. And so we have to build that strategy in when all of a sudden it's not so easy to just look at a phishing email and identify that. And a lot of times I like to talk of it in terms of an alternate channel mindset. We have to get users in a mindset where when they see something, if there is any kind of a doubt, they're in the mindset of what category of information are they looking for here, and then go to an alternate channel and see if indeed that is the case, if that's something that we're looking for. So kind of make the human the multi-factor authentication and eliminate some of that technical fatigue, make it a cultural piece.
To kind of add on to that, this may be controversial, I hate the phrase that the user is the weakest link in security. I hate that. It's such a cop-out that says, oh yeah, we can just blame the users because they're the idiots who click the link. That's wrong, right? If you haven't trained them to find and not do it, they can be the strongest link in security. Your users can be the strongest part of your security program if you appropriately train them and make sure that they know what to do. So I encourage all of you, please stop saying that. Change your mindset on it, change it into no, they're the front line of defense. They should be the strongest part of your security program.
If I can jump onto that, I think, again, the mindset is a huge factor. So I think we've all heard, to your point, Dan, security is a bottleneck, right? We talk about CI/CD developer, it really is, and I think we need to organizationally change it from being thought of as a bottleneck, and we have to drive a change in mentality that security is the responsibility and the benefit of every employee in the organization. And yes, some things might take a few seconds longer. You might need to, fingerprint one more time, or MF, whatever those security protocols are. I think there's a collaboration between the security teams and the rest of the company to figure out where's that balance of to not be over-intrusive and really stop the functionality of the business, but for users to understand this is there for a reason. It's not to stop you from doing your job, but education and the mentality really goes a long way. If you keep doing a security training once a year, just stop. You're wasting your money. Nobody's going to pay attention to it. You check the compliance box and nobody cares, nobody remembers. It's on a second laptop or screen anyway. Sorry to break the news to you. So I think even from a training perspective, we have to do it differently. We have to, first of all, stop shaming people, to your point. If we shame people, nobody's gonna tell you. And then it's gonna linger, and that mean time to detection only goes up. We all have to change the way that we approach cybersecurity training of non-security personnel. We have to address it from a very different mindset, and embrace it. I mean, there are going to be somebody's going to click a link, it's going to happen. We actually internally, we have an ongoing debate, when there's a phishing simulation, there's usually a Slack channel where people are hey, beware, this is a phishing simulation. There's a back and forth should we tell people that we think it's a simulation, or should we let them try to fail it? Like, no, I'm of the opinion, like, again, if you see something, say something, right? I'd rather have users say, hey, I suspect something, and have that conversation. But that only comes about if you get people to think differently about cybersecurity to begin with.
So I think that plays into building a framework a little bit. And Bill, you talk about that a lot. We've been on tons of calls together, and it's great hearing you talk about this. So imagine I'm a client and I don't really have a cybersecurity framework to follow. What would be your recommendation, or what are your thoughts around that?
I mean, that's a wide open question. You know, I just to kind of take a step outside of that for a minute, I love that there are so many resources that are available for organizations that are trying to increase their cybersecurity maturity model, right? You look at the NIST just released the cybersecurity framework version 2.0 as far as the final version. It's been out for a while. So there are resources that you can get to, but we also need to understand that teams can be small, and they may not have the opportunity to do that. If that's the case, then maybe there's an opportunity for them to interact with their peers, to be able to learn some information, go to conferences like this. The opposite is also true for some larger organizations. You know, one of the things that I find interesting when I get to meet CISOs, one of the things I love to ask them first is, are you an executive CISO or are you an advisory CISO? Because some CISOs, we find that they are going to be held personally, fiscally responsible for things, yet they don't have a say on the board. And so how do they actually drive good security posture for a company? So it is very difficult to figure out how to do your own due diligence and your own due care. Quite honestly, I think this is one thing that ATC can bring to the table. There are so many vendors out there, and they grow all the time. I love that slide that was put up, right, with all the millions and millions, right? And we're one of them. But it can be very difficult for organizations to begin to try to tackle this when they look at that massive sushi menu and they have no idea which of the pieces they're going to need. So I think having advisors within this landscape that can meet with them without first going and saying, okay, here's what we have, what do you want? Literally spend the time listening and maybe bring some experience from others who may happen to be in that vertical to say, here are some of the things that they have seen, and here are some of the things that you may want to consider. Has this been a part of your consideration? Spend that time to learn first before we start going in there and recommending solutions and saying, this is what we have to do. Hey, you got to go with our firewalls, or you need to do this managed detection and response service. What exactly are they looking for, and help tease that out. So honestly, I think that's one of the things that ATC brings into this world that's very valuable toward that.
Thank you. Yeah, I can say I've been on the other side before, not a security practitioner or working for a cybersecurity company, where we went through and we were like, well, we can do this on our own. We're going to figure out which security solution to implement. And the chart wasn't as big, but it was still pretty big then. And we went through 9 months of testing of different security solutions. We would talk to different people. We would get referrals. We would get POVs set up. I would hack those POVs to try to figure out if there was ways around them. And I ended up writing 19, 20-page reports for like 50 different companies by the time we were done, of all the things that I found that were vulnerable. And we looked at this and realized I spent basically a year of time. We had a lot of different vendors that we talked to through that time, which, then we had 50 different vendors trying to contact me once a week through LinkedIn or cell phone or every other option that was available. And when we got down, we made a decision, and then we realized about 6 months afterwards we made the wrong decision because we didn't know the right questions to ask, because we didn't use like a trusted partner like ATC to have them help recommend to you, which would be Vigilant, the best solution to implement for us. So, I really say that's, you can do it yourself, but it is very difficult, and you're probably going to get it wrong the first time if you're trying to do it all on your own. Use those resources that are available to you, the expertise that folks have, and really use that.
Chris, Dmitriy, any thoughts?
I guess I'll just say, from a framework perspective, understand what the frameworks are and how they're applicable, and if they're applicable to you. So, kind of NIST framework, MITRE ATT&CK framework, even more basic things like CIS controls. Just familiarize yourself with those concepts. But I agree, like if you start learning about it, like I'm going to tackle this as with my team. Best of luck, right? So that's where you want to understand what those things are, how they apply to the organization, but you want to leverage somebody else's expertise. And I will say, when you look for a provider, a partner, make sure you understand how they're leveraging those frameworks, how the solutions that they're providing, how they adhere to those frameworks, how are they used internally. Because again, right, we can all talk about frameworks, but like what you actually do with that on the other side matters. But I would very much agree, like, I'll disagree with the vendor, obviously.
I was going to say, do you agree with the Vigilant part?
But I would very much agree, like, don't try to do it all yourself, right? That doesn't mean that you don't have an active role to play. You absolutely do, but trying to do it all yourself, it's not going to be a very fruitful exercise, at least from what we've observed.
I'm going to take my answer a little bit different. So this morning, Brandon talked about people, processes, and technology as sort of the key to anything. And in security, that's been like a well-worn thing that people say for years and years also. I think for security, there's a missing piece, which is intelligence. And intelligence in security is understanding what you have and that an adversary wants, and then understanding the pathways for an adversary to get from them to what they want. And to me, that's the foundation of any good framework in security. So use NIST, use whatever you choose, but the first thing you need to understand is, what do we have that an adversary wants? That's the starting point for all of it. And then anything you build on top of that is going to be better, whether it's the people, process, technology. You're going to decide, what kind of people do we need? Let's not spend $5 to protect $1, right? Let's make sure we're building an appropriately sized and scaled security program for what we're doing. But it starts with understanding what you have that an adversary wants.
So Chris, from where you sit in your role at Red Canary, I'm very interested to hear from you what you see the trends are in cybersecurity going forward into the future, 5 years out. Like, what is the bleeding technology that people in the audience need to be aware of?
Yeah, there's a couple. The big one that I'm watching is, I call it like the platformization of security. I think there's an expectation, appropriate expectation, that if we're going to spend a bunch of money on the IT side with some vendor, we expect security to be a part of that, right? And so you see that with the massive growth of like the Microsoft security business, and expectation that if you buy your E5 license, that all the security for all those platforms is built in. Like was said earlier, that's not a silver bullet. Like, even if they build all the layers of technology from the security standpoint into that, they still don't have the intelligence to know what's in your environment that's important, or the processes for how you'd clean it up if someone like Dan gets in. But that's one of the big trends, and I think like we're going to observe that over time. Like Palo Alto, everybody, maybe not everybody, but saw the news this week of they actually are taking an earnings hit over the next several years just to sort of realign all their contracts as part of this platformization. But I'm not sure what the long-term implications of that are, but I think that's what we're going to see, is like that expectation that security is built in across the IT stack. So that's a big one. I think you can't say anything in terms of future trends without mentioning generative AI. I think there's going to be a lot of things that are tried and don't work. And so that was back to kind of Chris's talk, is make sure you're interrogating vendors about what the models actually are and what they might actually provide. But I think there's some things that are going to be absolutely transformative for security operations. The Copilot model is already like supercharging our SOC, being able to really easily answer questions that were previously really hard to answer. So those are probably my two biggest ones. Nothing probably earth-shattering, but we'll see how they play out.
Bill?
Yeah, I'd go even a little different direction, because I think sometimes in the cybersecurity world, we're a little bit guilty of staring at the shiny things. I think we really need to look at quantum computing. We need to pay attention to that. The estimates are that by about the early 2030s, quantum computing could be something that becomes very accessible to even threat actors. And what we actually see going on is a lot of what we call handle attacks. And they're not attacks that are loud that you see, but handle means harvest now, decrypt later. So there are threat actors that don't even have to become adversaries in the middle. They're literally harvesting encrypted data right now, knowing that quantum computing is coming, and they will be able to break that cryptography that exists today. So I think we need to be very careful, and my colleagues have said it, they're dead on. You have to understand what you have that is important in your organization. That data, that information that differentiates you, you have to understand how it flows, because those flows are your exposure point, and you're never going to see it because it can be collected passively. And then investigate the kinds of algorithms you're using today to at least try to push that bar back. because eventually we are going to get to a point where quantum computing is going to come to bear, and that data that's been silently recorded, it may be 5 years old or 6 or 7 years old. Is it still relevant? Because if it is still relevant, you're literally going to be caught off guard. So I'm really keeping my eye on where is quantum computing going? How are we going to potentially handle attacks, right? And what are the things that we can do now to help mitigate or at least push that bar back until that data is irrelevant or not as dangerous as it might be to us today?
Dan, any thoughts?
I have a little different than I think how everybody else is. So I've always thought of the offensive side, and something I've really seen happen. I'm in a lot of forums that are sketchy to say the least, but we're starting to see like monopolization of threat actor groups, almost where instead of having all of these different ones, you're starting to see them kind of scoop up the really good folks from those different threat actor groups. I mean, your only exception is nation state. You're always going to kind of have nation state groups that are separate. Until you start getting nations that like each other, but we won't go into some of those. But you're starting to see a lot of these APT groups actually combine resources together and go after targets, which if you think about what we've seen large companies like Microsoft or Google or Facebook or Twitter or X or whatever they're calling themselves now, they're like buying all these different platforms and combining them together. You're starting to see that with threat actors. Like I can see that in real time happening, and I know it's going to continue to go down that path because they're seeing great success with it. So what we've seen in some instances is a tactic used by one group that we've never seen in another group, now suddenly showing up in this other APT group. And it's like, well, how did that happen? Like how is this becoming a thing? So some of those signals and IOCs and things that you're triggering off of it's going to be very interesting if it continues down that path.
Nice. So I'll leave you guys with one final question. So if I was a IT leader sitting in this audience today, what would be your one piece of recommendation to tighten their cybersecurity posture, just improve what's going on in their organization?
I'd say 3 things: data classification, and data classification, right? Please understand what you have and understand its importance, and then act accordingly. I just think it's a lot of times when we talked about this, about building things piecemeal, if I want a high performance vehicle, I'm not going to go to O'Reilly's and Pep Boys and buy all the parts and try to put it together. Let's start first with what matters to your business, focus on that, and then grow from there and build your posture around that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely agree with the data. And the other thing I always want to say is every high-tech or technical solution doesn't always require a high-tech, or a high-tech problem doesn't require a high-tech solution. A simple example I've given before is in a pen test, the domain admin actually wrote down their domain admin password and stored it. It wasn't in a password vault anywhere. We got everybody else's DA account except that one because it was written down. They never ran it in memory. It was never accessed anything it shouldn't have accessed. So sometimes a low-tech solution can work for your high-tech problem too. So kind of think outside of the box some there. Don't just go with the most flashy thing that's available.
Yeah, throw one more thing in, which is when you think about what you have, which should lead you to what you use to protect it, data is obviously like number one. Keep in mind that a thing you have that an adversary wants might be the cloud environment where they can go in and spin up 1,000 GPU instances in 5 seconds to mine cryptocurrency, right? That's a thing you have that maybe traditionally you wouldn't think of it in that way, but think about it from that perspective, and that should lead you to the solutions you need for security. Maybe writing your passwords down instead of password vaulting.
I wasn't saying don't use passwords.
Write them all down on sticky notes. I'd echo, the cloud sentiment. I think, again, obviously, like the shift to cloud has been going on for a while, and I think that's still a huge open vector for people, and we've seen that get exploited. I would expand that to understand your data and understand where the data resides, and make sure that you have visibility for your security tools and your security platform across all of those different facets. Like broad visibility matters. I know there's some discussion on more data, less data. Like I'd say broader visibility data, not the amount, but what you're covering matters. And then again, as more and more companies are moving to cloud native, right, containerization, CI/CD pipelines are a critical component of it. So understand what you're doing, what the data is, how you're interacting with that data, and do you have visibility into the security posture of all of that data in all of those locations? I think that's a very often missed aspect or overlooked aspect.
That's awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been a fantastic panel. Thank you all for sticking around this afternoon. It's been a great day at the Tech Summit, and we're going to hand it off to Louis for some closing remarks. Thank you all so much.